Hello everyone, my name is Farah Ghanem. I'm Head of Climate Change and Policies Department at Alpen Limited, and I'm joined today by Yara Nehme to discuss and recap key updates on climate action in the UAE.
Hi everyone, and hi Farah. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be having this discussion because I know there's a lot of momentum around climate action that has happened recently.
I think we can start with the NDCs, the nationally determined contributions that were updated in November last year. UAE has committed to a GHG or a carbon reduction by 47% by 2035.
Yes, and in this round of NDCs, the UAE has introduced sector-specific targets for agriculture, waste, transport, and so many other sectors. Not only that, the UAE has also published a long-term strategy that highlights the reduction pathway up to 2050. So it includes strategies on how all of these sectors can reduce their emissions from now until 2050. In addition, we know the UAE is ramping up clean power generation, and they have a target to achieve 30% clean energy by 2030.
And the energy mix topic, not to get too technical, but we actually have seen it manifest itself in our work. The emission factor that we use for electricity grid has now dropped. In addition, we've seen many new renewable energy projects and initiatives in the UAE, and we've seen also scale-up of projects in the UAE. For example, the Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum Solar Park is aimed to grow into 5 gigawatts by 2030. Another interesting renewable energy project is the hydroelectric power station in Hatta. It's about 250 megawatts. And what's interesting about it is that when you think of hydroelectric renewable energy, you don't think of a desert. You think of a location that has rivers, lakes, bodies of water, waterfalls. But it's unique because it is, and indeed it is the first of its kind in the GCC as a hydroelectric power station.
That's a really interesting initiative, and it's proof that the UAE is actually pulling out all of the stops when it comes to cleaning the grid, cleaning infrastructure, cleaning utilities. We know also that the UAE is investing a lot in green hydrogen, and it wants to become a hub for clean energy, both in the region and hopefully around the world as well.
That's absolutely right, and all of these initiatives are mentioned within the NDCs. Not just that, there are numerous different initiatives and projects being undertaken within the UAE to reduce emissions and meet UAE's net zero 2050 commitment. What's interesting about 2024 is not just the updated NDC, but also that it's backed up by actual legislations. And one such important legislation is the UAE Cabinet Resolution number 67 of 2024 regarding the National Register of Carbon Credits. This legislation calls for companies and entities that emit more than 500,000 tons of CO2 to disclose their emissions and participate in the National Register for Carbon Credits.
I wanted to touch upon what 500,000 metric tons of CO2 equivalent actually means. So I wanted to put it into perspective for everyone. So 500,000 tons of CO2 equivalents is the equivalent of powering up about 14 Burj Khalifas.
Oh, wow.
Yes, exactly. But even though that number sounds very immense, it's actually easily exceeded by companies in manufacturing, industry, or power generation. So we have companies in the UAE and around the world even that top this number, that can achieve emissions up to millions in the scope 1 and 2 only.
We've actually worked with clients that far exceed the 500,000 ton emissions, public entities, real estate developers, manufacturers.
Exactly, Farah. And with those same clients, we're working on decarbonization roadmaps to help them reduce their carbon footprint. And this brings me to another point I want to touch up upon, which is net zero or carbon reduction in general. It is based on the premise that you will reduce operationally as much CO2 as possible. And then that final step, that final unavoidable, unreducible, let's say, emissions that you have remaining, then you will offset those. So that kind of takes us to the other part of the resolution, which talks about the National Carbon Credit Registry. So do you have anything to comment about that?
My comment on carbon credit is that yes, they're primarily used for those last unabatable, unresolved, let's call it carbon emissions, but we should always give chance for research and technology to catch up. A couple of months ago, I've heard about net zero steel, I've heard about carbon sequestering cement solutions.
And the cabinet resolution actually helps in ensuring that all of the carbon credit registry and carbon offsets that are being applied are verifiable. And primarily, the cabinet resolution does that by enforcing a monitoring, reporting, and verification framework for any entity that wants to publicly disclose their emissions. And this ensures, in turn, that the emissions are as accurate as possible, and it gives accountability to all of the companies who are reporting.
There's no way around not verifying your emission disclosures and your offsets for any genuine climate action, and as we've seen, for also compliance with legislations. That brings me to another point. The Cabinet Resolution number 67 is not the only legislation we've seen in 2024. In August 2024, we've also seen Federal Decree Law number 11 on the reduction of climate change effects. And what this law stipulates is that all sources must contribute to the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. And what do sources mean? Any public or private entity whose activities result in the release of greenhouse gas emissions. So there is no thresholds here. And what I find really interesting about this law in particular is that it also provides legislative cover for local authorities to establish adaptation plans. So it's not all about just accounting the emissions or reducing the emissions, but it's also about climate resilience.
I completely agree, and I know that this law is a significant step in achieving the UAE's net zero ambitions, both in terms of reducing emissions and in terms of having more climate resilience and dealing with these climate risks that have been emerging recently. Unfortunately, we don't need any legislation to see that there is an increase in temperatures that is unprecedented. There's a lot of flooding events that have happened in recent years. So the UAE is literally feeling the heat, and it's not just true about this country.
Boiling up here.
Yeah, absolutely. It's true about the entire region. So everyone's on this wave of let's start dealing with climate change properly. And this is very refreshing to see, both in the UAE and in the GCC as a whole.
What really excites me about all this is that we're seeing actions and initiatives by especially the big players in the region before we even heard about any legislations. It was all voluntary work. And that's really refreshing and shows that we're stepping up climate action in the region. Climate action in the region has definitely had its ups and downs, from great voluntary initiatives to inconsistencies due to lack of legislations. And now we are seeing legislations coming to life, so hopefully that streamlines the entire process of both disclosures on emissions and also reduction pathways.
I myself am really looking forward to seeing how this is going to build up momentum, both in the UAE and in the region. So I know that we've focused on the UAE a lot in our conversation today, but we know for a fact that other countries in the GCC are ramping up their own climate action agendas as well. I've really enjoyed our discussion today. It was a great conversation, and thank you.
Thank you, Yara. Likewise. And I hope everyone has found our discussion insightful and useful. Thank you for watching. Have a nice day.